My name is William, and for over 40 years I worked as a financial advisor. I built my life around discipline, trust, and knowledge of the market. I never became a billionaire, but I was proud that I could provide my family with a comfortable life. My only son, Daniel, was always ambitious, and I admired that about him. When Daniel turned 28, he came to me with an idea, a tech startup that could revolutionize how small businesses manage their finances. He had the passion and energy, but he lacked the experience and network to secure funding. That's where I came in. I spent months coaching him, using my connections to bring in investors. I even put in my retirement savings because I believed in him. Soon, his little idea became a fast-growing company. Within 5 years, it was valued at over $200 million. At first, Daniel was grateful. He often said, "Dad, I couldn't have done this without you." But success can change people. Slowly, I noticed he began to treat me less like a partner and more like an employee. He questioned my decisions, ignored my advice, and sometimes even laughed at my old-school methods. Then, one Monday morning, he called me into his office. His tone was cold, professional, like I was just another staff member. He leaned back in his chair, smiled, and said, "Dad, I no longer need your services. You're fired." The words cut deeper than any knife. Fired by my own son. I stared at him, searching his eyes for some sign of regret, but all I saw was arrogance. I nodded silently, stood up, and left the room. But before I walked out of that company forever, I made one decision. I took a document with me, a document that Daniel had no idea could change everything. And that's when the real story began. As I walked out of the building with that single document in my hand, my heart was heavy. That company was as much mine as it was Daniel's. Without my knowledge, connections, and sacrifices, he wouldn't have made it past the first investor meeting. Yet, here I was, discarded like a broken tool. The document I had taken wasn't just any file. It was a founder's agreement I had drafted years ago, back when Daniel and I first launched the company. At the time, Daniel was so eager to get started that he signed almost everything I put in front of him. That agreement clearly stated that although Daniel would be CEO, I still retained 45% ownership rights of the company. For years, I never used that clause against him. I wanted him to shine, to feel like the leader. But now, as I looked at that paper, I realized Daniel had no idea what power I still held. That evening, I sat alone in my study, staring at old family photos. I remember teaching Daniel how to ride a bike, cheering for him at his school play, paying for his college tuition. I had been there through every step of his life. And now, he had betrayed me for the sake of pride. I didn't want revenge. At least not at first, but the more I thought about how he humiliated me, firing his own father in front of staff, the more I knew I couldn't just let it go. The next morning, I called my old lawyer friend, Richard. He was shocked when I told him what happened. After reading the document, he leaned back in his chair and said, "William, your son may think he's the king of the castle, but legally, you still own almost half the castle. If you wanted, you could call a board meeting tomorrow and remove him as CEO." I felt torn. On one hand, he was my son. On the other, he had treated me like garbage. Richard's words echoed in my mind. Remove him as CEO. That night, Daniel called me, not to apologize, but to brag. "Dad, today was my first day running the company alone. Honestly, it feels great not having you breathing down my neck." He laughed as if I had been a burden, not a mentor. I didn't say much, just listened quietly. But inside, a decision was forming. If Daniel wanted to play this game, I had the perfect card in my hand. And come Monday morning, he was about to find out just how powerful that card really was. Monday morning arrived. I dressed in my best suit, the one I hadn't worn since Daniel's college graduation. As I looked in the mirror, I didn't just see a father anymore. I saw a man ready to reclaim his dignity. When I arrived at the office, whispers ran through the hallways. The employees were surprised to see me, but none dared to stop me. I walked straight to the conference room, where a board meeting had already been scheduled. Daniel sat at the head of the table, confident, smiling like he owned the world. "Dad," he said mockingly, "what are you doing here? Didn't you get the memo? You're out." I pulled the document out of my briefcase, laid it on the table, and slid it toward the board members. "Gentlemen," I said calmly, "before any further discussion, I think you should read this." The room grew silent as the legal agreement was passed around. Daniel's smile slowly faded. His hands trembled as he grabbed the paper, scanning through it. This can't be real," he stuttered. "Oh, it's real. And according to this, I still own 45% of this company, which means you cannot fire me. In fact, I have every right to call for a vote on whether you should remain CEO." Gasps filled the room. Some of the board members looked at each other, whispering nervously. They had no idea I still held so much power. Daniel's arrogance had blinded him. He had assumed he owned everything. Daniel's face turned red with anger. "You planned this, didn't you? You tricked me." I shook my head. "No, son. I protected us both when we started this company. But you got greedy. You forgot who stood by your side when this was nothing but an idea scribbled on a napkin." The board meeting turned into chaos. Some sided with me, others with Daniel. Finally, Richard, my lawyer friend, stood up and cleared his throat. "Let's not forget," he said, "Mr. William here has full legal authority to challenge leadership. A vote must be held." Daniel's confidence crumbled. For the first time in years, he looked small, almost like the little boy who once held my hand crossing the street. I could have ended his reign that very moment, but as I looked at my son, I felt something unexpected. Pity. So instead of destroying him, I offered a deal. "Daniel," I said firmly, "either we work together as equals, or I'll use this document to remove you. The choice is yours." The boardroom went dead silent, all eyes on him. Daniel's jaw tightened, his pride fighting against reality. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, defeated. "Fine," he muttered. "We'll do it your way." I nodded. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was respect. And finally, for the first time in years, I had it. But little did I know, Daniel wasn't done scheming, and the battle between father and son was only just beginning. For a few weeks after that tense board meeting, Daniel behaved. He was polite in front of the employees, respectful during meetings, and even called me Dad again instead of William. To outsiders, it seemed like we had made peace. But a father knows his son's eyes, and I could see it clearly. Resentment was burning inside him. Daniel wasn't used to sharing power. He hated the fact that I had outsmarted him. And when pride mixes with anger, dangerous things happen. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I overheard Daniel speaking on the phone in the hallway. His voice was low, but his words were sharp. "Yeah, we'll move the funds into the Cayman account. My father doesn't need to know. By the time he finds out, I'll have full control again." My blood ran cold. He wasn't just angry. He was planning something illegal. Transferring company funds offshore without board approval was fraud. If the authorities got wind of it, the entire company could collapse. Thousands of employees could lose their jobs. That night, I couldn't sleep.
Memories of Daniel as a little boy filled my head. How he once dreamed of becoming a doctor. How he cried when he broke his arm. How he hugged me after his high school graduation. I asked myself, where did I go wrong? How did my son turn into this man consumed by greed? The next morning, I decided I couldn't just sit back. I called Richard again and told him everything I overheard. He frowned. William, if Daniel really moves that money, he could face criminal charges. You'll need proof before we can act. So I started quietly investigating. I spoke to the finance department, asked subtle questions, reviewed the accounting software late at night. Slowly, the pieces began to come together. Large sums of money were indeed being moved in small increments, hidden behind fake invoices. It broke my heart, but I now had the evidence. The following Monday, I walked into Daniel's office. He looked up from his desk, pretending to smile. "Morning, Dad. Ready for another great week?" I dropped a thick folder on his desk. "Do you want to explain this?" His face turned pale as he opened the file and saw the printouts, bank transfers, fake invoices, offshore accounts. He slammed the folder shut. "You've been spying on me!" he shouted. "No," I replied quietly. "I've been protecting this company from you." For a moment, he was speechless. Then his pride took over again. "You wouldn't dare turn me in. I'm your son." I looked him in the eye and said the hardest words I had ever spoken. "You stopped being my son the day you chose greed over family." He clenched his fists, anger boiling inside him. But deep down, he knew I had the upper hand. And for the second time, I realized this war between father and son was far from over. After that confrontation in Daniel's office, I knew I couldn't delay anymore. The evidence I had collected was enough to destroy him if I handed it to the authorities. But part of me still hoped that my son would realize his mistakes before it was too late. That night, I invited Daniel to my house. We sat at the dining table where his mother once served him meals when he was just a boy. I laid the folder in front of him again. "Daniel," I said softly, "this is your last chance. Stop this now. Return the money, clean up the accounts, and we can still save both the company and our family." For a moment, I thought I saw regret in his eyes. His shoulders slumped, and he looked almost human again, vulnerable. But it didn't last. His jaw tightened, and he pushed the folder back toward me. "You don't understand, Dad. This company is mine. I built it. Everyone respects me, not you. And I won't let you stand in my way. If I have to bend the rules to keep control, so be it." My heart sank. It was clear Daniel had crossed a line he could never return from. The next morning, I called an emergency board meeting. I presented the evidence in front of all the members. Gasps filled the room as they read through the documents. Richard stood beside me, explaining the legal consequences of Daniel's actions. Daniel stormed into the room halfway through the presentation. "This is nonsense," he shouted. "My father is just bitter because I fired him. He forged these documents." But the finance director, a man Daniel trusted, stood up nervously and said, "Sir, it's true. We noticed unusual transfers but didn't question it because we thought you had authorized them." The room fell into silence. Daniel's face turned pale. For the first time, he realized the walls were closing in. The chairman of the board cleared his throat. "Given the evidence, I move to vote on Daniel's removal as CEO effective immediately. Daniel looked at me with fury in his eyes. You did this! You destroyed your own son! I felt tears welling in my eyes, but I didn't look away. No, Daniel, you destroyed yourself. The vote was unanimous. Daniel was removed from CEO that very day. Security escorted him out of the building as he shouted threats and promises of revenge. Employees watched in shock as the once proud leader left in disgrace. As I sat back in my chair, the weight of victory felt hollow. I had saved the company, yes, but I had lost my son. Or so I thought. Because later that week, I discovered Daniel's final move, a move that threatened not just the company, but everything I had built in my entire life.
The day after Daniel was removed as CEO, I tried to focus on stabilizing the company. Investors were nervous, employees were shaken. But then, 3 days later, I received a phone call that nearly knocked the breath out of me. It was from our company's head of cybersecurity. His voice was panicked. "Mr. William, we have a serious breach. Someone hacked into our servers last night and wiped out sensitive financial records. Millions of dollars worth of contracts and data are gone. We traced the attack. It came from an IP address linked to Daniel." I closed my eyes. My own son, now an enemy of the empire we built together. Later that evening, I returned home to find an envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a handwritten note. The words chilled me to the bone. "You think you won, old man? This is just the beginning. I'll burn down everything you love before I let you take it from me." I sat down heavily in my chair, my hands trembling. This wasn't just corporate betrayal anymore. This was personal war. The next morning, Richard and I met with federal investigators. The evidence of hacking, combined with the offshore transfers, painted a damning picture. They told me charges against Daniel were inevitable. But deep inside, I wrestled with guilt. This was my son, the boy I had once held in my arms, who used to beg me to tell him bedtime stories. Could I really watch him go to prison for the rest of his life? That night, I dreamed of my late wife. In the dream, she whispered, "Protect the family, William. Protect what's right." I woke up with tears streaming down my face, but also with clarity. The next day, I made my decision. I would not cover up Daniel's crimes anymore. If he wanted to destroy me, he'd have to face the full force of the law first. I called the investigators back and gave them full permission to proceed. Arrest warrants were drafted. And a week later, as I sat in my office reviewing reports, I saw the headline flash across every news channel. Tech mogul Daniel Reed arrested for fraud and cybercrimes, facing 25 years in prison. Employees cheered. Investors breathed a sigh of relief. The company's stock even began to recover. But as for me, I felt no joy, only emptiness. I had saved the business, but I had lost my son to his own demons. Or so I thought, until the day I received a letter from prison, a letter that would change everything I believed about Daniel's downfall. A week after Daniel's arrest, I received a letter with the prison seal on it. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. The handwriting was shaky, but unmistakably his. "Dad, I know you probably hate me. Maybe you should. I became arrogant, greedy, and I hurt the man who gave me everything. But I need you to know, not everything you think is true. Some of the money transfers, some of the hacking,
It wasn't me. I was being used, and now I'm the one paying the price. I frowned, reading the words again and again. Used? By whom? The letter continued. Remember when we brought in outside investors 3 years ago? One of them, Victor Hayes. He isn't who he says he is. He pressured me to move money offshore, promised he'd protect me from the board. At first, I thought he was helping me. But soon I realized he was siphoning millions for himself. When I tried to back out, he threatened me. The hacking you found, Victor's people did it. I was too scared to tell you. By the time I wanted to stop, it was too late. I dropped the letter onto my desk, my heart pounding. Could this be true? Daniel, a pawn in someone else's game? Richard and I began digging into Victor Hayes. He was one of those slick venture capitalists who had bought a stake in the company early on. His background seemed clean on paper, but the deeper we looked, the darker it got. Offshore shell companies, lawsuits quietly settled, a history of bankrupting startups after draining their funds. My stomach churned. Daniel had been arrogant, yes, and guilty of many things, but what if Victor had pushed him down a darker path? The next weekend, I visited Daniel in prison. For the first time since his arrest, we sat face to face. His eyes were bloodshot, his spirit broken. Dad, I know you bravery me. Maybe you should. I became arrogant, greedy, and I hurt the man who gave me everything. But I need you to know, not everything you think is true. I studied my son for a long time. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to remind him that no one forced him to sign fraudulent transfers. But another part of me saw the scared boy beneath the hardened man. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to save him from being crushed entirely. As I left the prison that day, I knew my battle wasn't over. I had won against my son, yes, but now I faced a bigger enemy. The kind of man who hid in shadows and destroyed lives with a pen stroke. And this time, I wasn't fighting just for the company. I was fighting for my son's redemption. After Daniel's confession and the discovery about Victor Hayes, I knew my fight wasn't over. If Victor truly orchestrated this, then exposing him was the only way to clear my son's name and to save the company once and for all. I called Richard and explained everything. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. Victor Hayes. I've heard whispers about him. Ruthless, untouchable. But if what Daniel says is true, he's left a trail somewhere. Every thief does. For weeks, we dug deeper. We traced wire transfers, interviewed former employees of companies Victor had bankrupted, and followed shell corporations across different countries. Slowly, a clear picture emerged. Victor had been using startups like ours as his personal ATM. He lured young CEOs with promises of fast money, pressured them into illegal deals, then left them to take the fall while he vanished with the profits. The more evidence we gathered, the more determined I became. I wasn't doing this just for Daniel. I was doing this for every family, every worker, every dreamer Victor had crushed. Finally, we had enough to take to the authorities. Federal investigators launched a full-scale probe into Victor's dealings. But Victor wasn't a fool. He found out. One night as I left the office, a black car followed me home. The driver slowed down as it passed, the windows rolled down, and a voice called out, "Back off, old man, or you'll regret it." I stood frozen in my driveway as the car sped away. Fear gripped me, But then I thought of Daniel sitting in a cold prison cell, waiting for me to fight for him. I clenched my fists. No, I wouldn't back down. The following week, the authorities raided Victor's offices. Computers, files, everything was seized. The news exploded. Investor Victor Hayes under federal investigation for multi-million-dollar fraud. I visited Daniel in prison that evening. His face lit up for the first time since his arrest. "Dad, you did it?" he whispered. "Not yet," I told him. "But the walls are closing in on Victor. If he falls, your case may collapse with him. You might walk free." Months passed as the investigation unfolded. Witnesses came forward, victims shared their stories, and piece by piece, Victor's empire crumbled. Eventually, prosecutors offered Daniel a deal: testify against Victor in exchange for a reduced sentence. When I told him, Daniel hesitated. "After everything I've done, do you really think I deserve a second chance?" I placed my hand on his shoulder, my voice breaking. "Son, everyone deserves redemption. Even you. Don't waste it." In court, Daniel testified with raw honesty. He admitted his arrogance, his mistakes, but also revealed the threats Victor had made. The jury listened carefully. By the end, the verdict was clear. Victor Hayes, guilty on all counts, sentenced to 40 years in federal prison. Daniel Reed, guilty but with cooperation, sentence reduced to 5 years. It wasn't freedom yet, but it was hope. Over those 5 years, Daniel changed. Prison humbled him. He read, studied, counseled younger inmates about making better choices. By the time he walked out, he wasn't the same arrogant CEO I once knew. He was quieter, wiser, and most importantly, grateful. The day he was released, I waited outside the gates. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then Daniel hugged me tightly, his voice trembling. "Dad, thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on you." Tears filled my eyes as I whispered back, "Welcome home, son." Together we started rebuilding, not just our relationship, but also the company. Investors, seeing Victor's downfall, returned with renewed trust. Employees welcomed Daniel back cautiously, but soon saw he had truly changed. The company grew again, stronger than before. But this time it wasn't about millions of dollars or flashy headlines. It was about legacy, trust, and the bond between father and son. I often think back to that day Daniel fired me, the day he thought he didn't need me anymore. In truth, it was the beginning of a painful journey for both of us. But in the end, it taught us the most valuable lesson of all. A company can rise and fall, fortunes can be made and lost, but family, if given a second chance, can heal and rebuild stronger than ever. And for me, that was worth more than all the millions in the world.